Welcome to another episode of Well-Adjusted Mama. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Brayton, and today's guest is author Kirsten Falsey of Hope and Emergence, A Journey Through Grief and Postpartum Depression. Kirsten was born in Elk Grove Village in Illinois and raised in Tucson, Arizona. She attended the University of Arizona, where she was a recipient of an Alumni Scholarship. She earned a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing and went on to become a labor and delivery nurse. She moved to California and was a labor and delivery nurse for 10 years, 4 of which she was a charge nurse. She became pregnant for the first time with twins in 2010. Then in 2011, right before they were born, Kirsten lost her beloved mother to cancer. While grieving over the loss of her mother, Kirsten gave birth to her twin daughters. Soon after giving birth, Kirsten started seeing a therapist and eventually a psychiatrist after it was realized that she was not only grieving the loss of her mother, but that she was also suffering from postpartum depression, which eventually led to stays in a psychiatric hospital. Nearly 2 years after her twins were born, and with various forms of help, resources, and therapy, Kirsten eventually was able to heal. She wrote in a journal throughout her entire process, and those journal entries became the foundation for her book. Writing was a cathartic experience for Kirsten, which made her cry, smile, and take ownership of her story. She hopes to reach other moms going through something similar. She hopes her story inspires and encourages others to seek help and let others know they are not alone. Earlier this year, in 2015, Kirsten gave birth to their third child. Kirsten and her husband, Jim, and their 3 daughters live in Southern California. In addition to raising her children, Kirsten reaches out to other moms in her community. For more information, please visit the publisher website at estepfitzgerald.com. Welcome, Kirsten, to the show. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Excited to be here. Thank you.
Yes. So I was able to read your book, and, I really am this is such an important topic to me to share on the podcast. And ironically, another guest recently I had on the show is a doctor who herself suffered with postpartum depression and grief simultaneously and shared her story. So this is just good that we're getting these stories out to an audience so that women are not feeling so alone and stigmatized by this. So please talk about why you decided to write this book and what it's about.
I decided to write my book, Hope and Emergence, after suffering through extreme grief from the loss of my mom to stage 4 cervical cancer and then the ensuing postpartum depression that I developed after the birth of my twins. Throughout the process, I felt very alone, very isolated, felt that there was not one single other person, other woman out there who could share a similar experience. And I really wanted to put the information forward and be brave to share my personal story so that other women could understand and know that they're not alone in the journey and that there are other people who share a similar experience.
Right. It's so powerful. And your book is just really very emotional. Even for me, not having experienced postpartum depression, it's hard to read at times. There were times I'm like, I have to just put this book down, take a little break from it because it's just very intense. The pain that you were experiencing really comes through in this book.
Yeah, and I wanted to really describe that pain and give a really clear picture to the reader because the emotions are very real and they need to be validated. When a person is saying that they're suffering and that they're having these thoughts of potentially harming their child or even inflicting self-harm, those are very, very real feelings and real emotions. They're not coming, just out of a sleep-deprived state or, a bad day. They come from a very deep, dark place, and I wanted them described clearly so that people who read, who maybe are helping someone who might be suffering through, know this is a real problem. It's not just something the person's going to get over in a matter of time. I know it was a scary place for me to go, and a lot of my book came from journal entries that I was using to help get through the process and kind of come to terms with what I had gone through. And it was difficult when I would see it written down. I had to cry over it and kind of come to terms with that. That did happen. I did think that way, but I'm getting beyond that now. And it's, a scary place to go, but it's important to, recognize that the feelings are in fact true.
Yes. They're real, and they're definitely, serious, and and it's, it's a cry for help. And so, and I can see how the journaling that you did during your healing process that's now made into this book was part of healing. That was part of your healing, is to get that out on the page.
It was, yeah. When my twins would take their 2.5-hour nap or so, that was my time to sit down and really just start from the beginning of my story, from when I found out when my mom was sick with cancer, through her 18-month journey, and how, I was pregnant with the twins, and I lost her halfway through the pregnancy. And so it was a really delicate time to have a loss that significant. My mom and I were very, very close. And so I really just started from the beginning all the way up into the point where I was at my lowest. And it was hard, but it was a place I had to go back to find closure on each separate issue along the way. And just to accept again that it happened, stop feeling the guilt that I had these thoughts and feelings, and try to move forward towards a happier, better mental place. Right.
That's right. So for me as a reader of your book, I saw this common thread of you feeling very vulnerable, feeling shameful and judged. And, it speaks kind of to what I believe is there's social stigma in our culture regarding mental illness. And that could be any type of mental illness, whether it's postpartum depression or not. So I'm curious what your thoughts are about that.
I think that our culture, has a big stigma around mental illness, really because, in my opinion, I think people in the community see a person with mental illness as a person who's very weak, and that they're not able to fully function, or, as people say, keep it together in order to get through a day. And it's really not about that at all. It actually takes a lot of strength to make it through each and every day when you really are truly in poor mental health. And it's really difficult to get through a day. And I think that sometimes people have this idea that someone with mental illness is unstable, or the word, crazy, and that something's just not right with them. And it's just like any other disease out there, but there isn't a lot of education around it. And I think there's a lot of just misunderstandings in the community about really what mental illness is. And I know some people sometimes assume that the person suffering can't be a fully functioning member of society. And, there's such a huge spectrum of mental illness. And, with help and medication, you can be fully functioning and present in your day-to-day life. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to fail at your future, or, that you're not going to be able to get through day by day. So I think that the main thing for our community is just to primarily educate, and just to take away that fear. I know a lot of people are afraid. In my opinion, with my own experience, friends and family were afraid to go there with me, to really ask me those dark questions and to hear me speak those difficult, issues. They had a hard time. And I think culturally, a lot of times people have a hard time seeing you sad and seeing you kind of down, and they don't really know how to help.
Right. Yes, and that also was mentioned a lot in your books, with the two most important men in your life, your husband and your father. They saw you going through this, and they didn't know what to do to help. And I know especially the masculine always wants to kind of swoop in and save, right? And that can be so hard, and friends as well, girlfriends as well. So, what would you share with maybe, let's say a family member of a loved one who is going through a really challenging time? What's the best way that they could serve their loved one who is depressed?
I think that they just need to approach the situation with no judgment behind them. I know that a big hurdle for me was my interactions with my in-laws. We had been close for many, many years. My husband and I are high school sweethearts, and I assumed that my mother-in-law would step in the mothering role when I lost my mom, and she didn't know how to handle my open emotions. And when she came to help out when our twins were 5 weeks old, we had a big fallout. I really was just very real with my sadness and told her she was lucky she got to be here. And, unfortunately it took a turn, misinterpretation, and me being sad was too much for her to cope with. And I think that if someone's going to be supportive, you need to put your own personal opinions about the illness or, your own personal experiences aside and approach it from a really non-judgmental place. And if you're not able to do that, to be upfront with the person and say, I am not the right person for you right now to help you through this journey. Because as a result, my in-laws didn't speak to us for 9 months. And it confused me. I ended up feeling guilty and thinking that I had done something wrong, where it was actually them, in fact, that were in the wrong. And having the opinion again, with society of grief will end. You can't be sad forever. And they really made it difficult for me in saying, your mom's been gone for 3 months now. You have so much to be happy about. You've been sad long enough. It's time for you to move forward. And that was very judgmental. They're the only people in my circle who have said anything like that to me before. And it was a big setback because it did get me thinking that I was, just not being grateful for what I had in front of me. I thought they have a point. She has been gone for 3 months, and look I have healthy twins at home and a wonderful husband and a roof over my head. But the two issues were very separate. Of course, I was happy about my family and my blessings, but on the same time frame, I still was struggling with the loss of my mom. So I think that if people are going to help, they need to really ask the person, what is it that you need from me? How can I best serve you? And it may not be something obvious like the laundry or the dishes or cleaning. It may be, I need you to talk with me. I need you to just listen to me, and not give your opinion all the time. Because the worst thing people told me too was time will pass and this feeling and this sadness, it's going to pass. That's not what you want to hear when you're in the midst of your grief. And yes, they are correct and they are true. But I think people need true acknowledgement of how they feel, and they need to be validated.
Yes, and that's so true. And I can see why people might say that. They're trying to cheer the person up, but I think that person's just not ready to go there. And so it is about respecting that they just need to be where they're at that moment. And I think for someone to be, when they're there in that space, just really empathizing with that person and just, you don't have to fix their pain, right? You just can just having a presence, just sitting next to somebody is just showing that you love them and they can feel that, you don't have to fix the problems. Right.
Yeah, because it's not what it's about. It's just showing your support and to say, I'm here for you if you need me, and I can help you to find the help that you need. Because I know when I was depressed, I had a hard time navigating the system, and trying to find the help that I needed. And even while I was pregnant, again, everybody was afraid to upset the fragile pregnant person. But for me, I really needed someone to ask those difficult questions, and to say, have you thought about who's going to be your support when your mom is no longer here? Because she may not be well enough to make it to see, the birth of your babies. And those are hard questions to ask, but I know now, having gone through the experience, when I have a friend who's going through a loss, I understand that it's important to ask those questions in a sensitive way, and just to offer, the support that they need.
Wow, so that's so huge, just for, a friend to be like, well, let me research some postpartum doulas for you, for example, that can support you when you bring home the newborn, or like you said, I've even heard of some women who have set up like a chain, so there's different people, cooking dinner, doing dinner drop-offs or running errands and just, all these things that really can help a family, not be so in survival mode, but they can feel supported by their community. And it's not a drain to one person because it's multiple people that are stepping up, and they feel useful, and they feel like, oh, I can provide one meal a week, or I can run errands this day. So it's just people in general, I find, want to help, but a lot of times they just don't know how to. And so having maybe one friend organize, a schedule like that could really come in handy for a family who's going through this.
Yeah, it was really difficult for me to accept help with the twins. Being a firstborn, I was just always very independent. My husband's a firstborn. We've been out in California for 12 years with all of our family in Arizona, so we've been very accustomed to finding our way on our own, just making decisions together and knowing we can't really rely on that quick phone call to mom or to dad, can you come help us out for a half an hour at bath time? We had to be resourceful on our own. And I know for me personally, I never really liked people telling me, I guess, what to do. And I did have friends who were saying, you need to look into getting, a nanny and getting the help. But then again, you think about finances and, the different constraints, and it doesn't have to be full-time help. There are usually a lot of friends available who are more than happy to cuddle a newborn baby, and give you that hour break, to get a little bit of sleep or to take a longer than 5-minute shower. And I know that we had a really hard time just letting anybody in for simple tasks, even doing our laundry. And looking back, I wish I would have let more people in, but I was really stuck in that part of my grief where I was in denial that my mom was gone, and I kept thinking that the next person walking in the door was going to be her. And so I was a little bit closed off to letting other people in because I was just really, really wanting my mom and only my mom to be the one there for me. And with the birth of our recent child, we came home from the hospital, and that first day my best friend said, I'm free till 3. Would you like me to stay? Jumped on that, that option and said, sure, cuddle the baby, bring her to me when she's hungry, and took a nice 2-hour nap. And I now know it's okay, and people do not offer to help you if they truly don't want to help you. That's one thing I've learned too.
That's right. So that's huge. If someone's offering to help, by denying them that opportunity, it's actually not only can be hurtful for you, but it's hurtful for them. Like they're actually wanting to be, a part of your success as a parent or as a person in life. So I think that's such a good thing. I think women in general, we're caretakers, and so it can be hard to be taken care of. But that's really the beauty of the feminine, is allowing ourselves to be taken care of, whether it's by our partner, by our friends, family. And if people aren't offering help and there's a need, especially like scheduling that for, like you said, when you're coming home with that newborn, having even ideally some support lined up in advance so that it's there, I know when people reach out to me, I'm like always happy to, like, if I know they're calling, it's like I'm there, even if I don't necessarily think to offer it. So I always embrace that. Yeah,
it's important and it's hard, but, you really can't do it all on your own. I tried to do it all and juggle all of that on my own, and I had, my mental break. I couldn't juggle it anymore. I was no longer capable of, trying to put all the pieces together on my own. And I needed help. And, I know, like I said, not everyone's capable of giving you the help that you need. Sometimes you don't know the help that you need. And so the best advice I can give is just offer yourself and just, sometimes you have to be specific. Can I bring you a meal? Can I run to the store for you? Can I just come sit with you? And the person will pick something usually that will be of a benefit to them. And I know when my mom was going through her cancer journey for 18 months, her counselor actually pulled myself, my father, and her in the room and said, your daughter's telling me that you're not letting your friends in anymore. And my mom was extremely social. Friends were starting to call me from Tucson and say, we're worried about your family because they're not returning phone calls, they're not coming to church. And, I shared with their counselor, I said, they're not letting anybody come over anymore and bring meals. They're not letting anyone help with transportation. And she sat them down and very firmly said, you're doing your children a disservice by showing them that you're not accepting people's help. And it was a big message, to listen to. And they finally started to hear, that this is the best way that people in your life know how to help you. They can't cure your cancer or share your pain, but they definitely want to be able to take away some burden And once my parents heard that from a professional, from someone other than myself, they opened up their doors again and let people in. But again, it's really hard to let people see your true feelings and your true emotions. And the people who support you most and who will be there for you through thick and thin are the ones that will come by your side. That's
right. Wow, I think that is just like such important advice for all women to hear. And I think probably going through an experience like this, you really get to see which people in your life are, the best, the truest friendships, right? The ones that really, like you said, are with you for better or for worse and not just for the happy times.
Yeah, and I think, again, just with society, we are brought up to be independent, to finish school, and to move out of your parents' home or whoever's home it may be and live on your own. Be independent. Pay for your own car. Pay your bills. And we've really gotten away from, the saying of it takes a village to raise a child. And you do need a lot of support around you. You don't have all the answers as a person or as a parent. And with multiple people around you and different perspectives and different opinions, you really give your family, the full benefit and the full approach to being the best family you can be. And I know for myself personally, when I offer help, I'm offering because I truly, truly want to take something off your plate. And I would not be offering if I didn't want to help you. And, again, it was a big lesson to me. It probably took me 9 months to a year to get through, the difficult pain of my in-laws not being that support. And, the support you need may not come from immediate family. It may be that friend you had for, a year that you met in a mom group, or it could be that friend you knew from college. And in my book, I talk about my best friend from Arizona who was calling to wish me a happy birthday. I happened to be in the hospital at that time and so didn't answer any phone calls. And my husband finally took the call and shared with her what was going on. She called back in an hour and said, I'm on the next plane out to Los Angeles. And she just really stepped up as a person who was just going to be present, was just going to come and love my babies the way that she knew I would want them loved. And it's left a big impact on my husband and, in my life, because that was really, for her, like a really bold thing to do, to put her husband aside and her 2 children aside to give us her time. And that was really special for us.
Most valuable resource, time, and what a gift it was, not only for your family, but really to herself. That's what I find when we give to others in such an unselfish manner, like your friend showed. It's such a huge gift to that person who's giving as well. So it's a win-win.
It is. I agree.
So, a lot of the people listening may have not already read your book. So I was hoping you could kind of share. You hinted like there was, after the birth of the babies, you were not only still grieving the loss of your mother, but then you developed the postpartum depression and you had a mental break. So can you share with us kind of what that looked like and how you got out of that hole?
With postpartum depression, I think there's a lot of women who think that it happens within the first month or so of giving birth, where in fact the depression can develop anywhere within that first year after giving birth. And for me, I had the baby blues, just the crying intermittently here and there after the first couple weeks of the birth. And then things felt okay for a while. I felt like I was, getting a routine down. And probably around the 6-month mark or so was when things started to change and things kind of dark. And the reality that my in-laws were not coming back into our life started to set in, and all the support that we had, been given with the death of my mom, those people started to kind of move forward in their own life, and the phone calls stopped coming in. And I had left my job after 10 years, and so I felt a little more isolated, like, okay, I'm going to do this every day now for the next, how many years? Just not talk to any other person other than baby talk. And, I started to feel a little bit unsettled all of a sudden. And we had visited Tucson for the 1-year passing of my mom, and that was on New Year's Day. And I really, in my own mind, had a view of how I wanted that time to go. I wanted my brother and his family and my dad and us to gather and to share memories of my mom and how special she made our holidays and just how much we missed her. And it was really the elephant in the room, and we ignored it completely. We went to church. I was raised Catholic, and we had a mass said for her, and then we just went about our day. And I remember traveling back to California and thinking that was really disappointing. We didn't even really acknowledge the fact that she's gone. And so, at this point, I was taking one medication for my mood, and it was called Zoloft. And it felt like it was working pretty well, but on that 8-hour drive back to California, and my in-laws had known we were there visiting in Tucson and did not acknowledge that visit, I lost it. I just cried to my husband. I said, I can't keep doing this. I said, I feel awful. I feel like I'm failing as a mom. I miss my mom. I'm sad that your parents aren't present in our life. And then I started to share with him, I'm feeling like I'm going to hurt our babies. And it was hard to say that, really hard to say that. I know it was hard for him to hear, but I was being honest. And I cried for 4 hours on the way home, and was exhausted from that. And as soon as we walked in the door, I called my psychiatrist who had prescribed the medications, and she prescribed an additional medication, told my husband he had to take a week off of work, and I had to give away all of the child care duties to somebody else. And really, for me, it was just a temporary bandage on the situation. The medication made me very tired. I was exhausted from the trip to Arizona, and so I pretty much just slept, for 3 days straight, only to get up to eat and to drink and shower. But when I was laying in my bed and I'd hear my babies cry, I tried so hard to bring myself to help my husband and to get up and check on them. But it was as though a ton of bricks was just weighing me down, and I physically did not have the strength to get out of my bed. That was really the lowest point for me, and, definitely classified as a mental break. And I was so sad. I had never been sad like that before, and it was a very scary time. And if anything, I realized I needed some help. And unfortunately, my doctor thought that just extra sleep would take it away. And that's sometimes something, where sometimes you need to investigate and find a new practitioner who maybe has some other treatment modalities that will assist, really on a path of healing instead of just a temporary fix.
Right. Yeah, and then there was also some hospitalizations that occurred after that as well.
Right. Yeah, after about that month or so, things got even a little darker, and I started to have suicidal thoughts, which was very, very scary, and immediately called our mental helpline through our insurance. And they had a counselor on the other line, and they kind of walked me through what I was feeling. And I called my psychiatrist, and she just said, if you don't feel that you can be safe and that you can keep yourself safe, you need to go to the hospital. So it was a personal choice. I wasn't required to go there. But I knew that I was not getting well, so to speak, on my own. Like, I knew that what I was feeling was beyond my personal health. I knew that something was not quite right, and I needed a group of professionals to kind of assist me through and to find the right path. And being a nurse for 10 years and having been in nursing school, I knew what a psychiatric hospital was like. So I wasn't as afraid to bring myself there. I had an idea of what to expect, more or less, but it was really scary because there's no timeline on how long you're going to be there until you spent some time there. I didn't know who I was going to meet, who could I trust. It was going to be a different doctor taking care of me than who I was used to. And I didn't know when I was going to see my family again. So it was definitely a really fearful first step, but one that I knew needed to be done.
Yeah, it's really, and at the end of the day, it was like such a, obviously probably one of the best decisions that you've made, right, to keep yourself and your family safe by checking yourself in the hospital.
It was the best decision I could have made because I have a feeling without, kind of making that first step, I possibly could be on that same path still. And looking back on how I felt and how those months were, I would never want to revisit that time again if I knew there was something I could do to improve the situation. It was just a really scary time. You know, a lot of my joy was dampered just by the way I was feeling. And it's okay, you know, when it happens to someone, you know, it happens. And as long as you, I think, do the best you can do and be as resourceful as you can be, you know, you're doing the healthiest thing you can do for yourself. And one of the nurses that took care of me said something really profound, which was, if you can't take care of yourself and get well, you are not going to be able to take care of your family. And it was true, you know, for the reason why I got up every day. But a lot of joy of taking care of them was gone. Just kind of like a job in a way, and I have to feed them and change them and clothe them, and I was missing out on the pure happiness that comes around being a mom. And that really stuck with me, and that's something I tell other people who are having a hard time, like, you got to take care of yourself. You got to get some extra rest. You need to find some time to go check in with your doctor, and then you're going to be fully present to take care of your family.
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate for mama self-care, and so that comes from, like, you know, support, really, taking some time off to take care of yourself instead of just putting the needs of your family always in front of your own.
Yeah, and it's really hard to find that balance because, again, I think, you know, I know for me, I thought I can work and I can be a mom. I had it all planned out. You know, nurses have really flexible schedule options, and I thought, you know, I'll work per diem. I'll work, you know, that once a week schedule, and I'll cluster them all together, and my husband will be home, and we don't have to worry about childcare, and I can still have my job and see, you know, that community of friends, and then I can still be home during the week for my kids. And it's okay, in my opinion, to put something aside. And for me, it was my nursing career, but I know that I can't because this time my twins are 4 now. It has flown by for me, and it's only 1 more year with them at home. They're going to be in school. So the need, you know, is going to dissipate year by year, and they're not going to need me as much as they need me now. And so, you know, being a full-time stay-at-home mom was a really big adjustment, and it took a lot of patience with myself to kind of adapt to a new routine. And it's not for everyone, which is fine. I think each woman needs to find out what works out best for herself and for her family. And then somewhere in there to carve out a little bit of time to get away, whether it be with a babysitter coming over or with your husband giving you that time and that space. You do need time to recharge and to rejuvenate your spirit. Right.
That's so true. There was a point in the book that I wanted to cover that I think is so important. You were, you know, working with a psychiatrist. You had been in the hospital, were taking some meds, and then you had to go back to the hospital again very shortly after. And you recognized that the practitioners that you were working with were not keeping you as healthy as possible, right? It wasn't the right fit, and you switched practitioners. Can you talk about, you know, for women that maybe have been working with a doctor for a while or have had relationships, and, you know, but they may not be getting the best care that they need, and how important it is to switch?
Yes, you know, I thought for me initially, my first therapist, I really found her as a way of convenience because I didn't want to be away from my twins for very long. So she was 5-minute drive away, and I would go every other week or so to see her. And my husband says he came with me to an appointment, which I don't even recall him being there. I was feeling so awful. And he said all she did was listen to you cry, and she didn't tell you one method of how to keep yourself out of a hole, out of a dark thought, a method to get you back on track to a positive way of thinking. And I didn't even realize that my hour was just spent being sad the whole time. And, you know, she wasn't insistent on me coming every week and being accountable for my own mental health and knowing that it was so important to check in every week at that stage. And I know, you know, looking back, I feel she should have known the difference between grief and the postpartum depression when I started to report that my thoughts were getting really dark. I probably told her every time I went in, you know, I'm having these feelings like I'm going to harm my children. And that was such a scary thing for me. I never wanted to hurt them. But she took it and said, you know, I think you're just really sad. You're really confusing your sadness with depression. And it was a little bit of a gray zone, but for me and for my husband, when I reported thoughts of harming my children, that was the end. That was when, medication needed to come.
Yeah.
And, there's different approaches, I think, to psychiatry depending on maybe when the physician went to school. So I know my first psychiatrist had been practicing a lot longer, and I think her method was just medicate. And, the physician I met while I was in the hospital was the same one at both admissions. And so he saw me, the month prior, the first admission, and then the second time saw how much, more distress I was in and said, I don't think these medications are working for you. So he had a plan. He had, a 3 medication treatment plan for me. He insisted I show up to see him monthly. He said, you will go to therapy every week and you will come back to the hospital when you're discharged for a 2-week outpatient program. And so the plan was set for me. I really wasn't in a place where I was able to decide on my own what I needed best. And, really I think the best person to kind of help you assess if you're seeing the right person, a really close family member, your partner, your spouse, just to say, how do I seem to you? Because my husband was telling me, where did you go? Where are you? I want my wife back. And he started to realize whatever you're doing every other week, in these therapy sessions, nothing's changing. You're still in the same place you were in 3 months ago. So he actually took, the reins on it, took the lead and spoke to a friend who had gone through severe depression, actually a male friend. And they shared their story. And we actually went through a referral from their personal therapist. And I ended up joining their practice. And the very first day I walked into the new therapist's office, she gave me homework. And, I had to write a letter to my mom. And she said, be as honest as you can be about if your mom was sitting right here, what you would want to tell her. And I was shocked to be told homework, I have time to go home and do homework, but it was her method of getting me to be honest with my feelings and to really investigate and explore why I was having the feelings I was having. And she asked more questions than my previous therapist did. She was definitely not giving me the answers. She was asking in a way that got me to think differently and to be a little bit more open about diving in a little bit deeper into the emotion. And so probably 2 years or so after seeing her every week religiously, which was a lot of time investment for me. But again, it was 1 week, 1 hour out of my week, and it was really important for me to give myself that time. I started to say to her, you're a little sneaky. You were asking me all those questions for me to really look inward and to find out on my own, weren't you? I said, that was always my plan, and she's actually a psychologist, which, the previous therapist was a marriage and family therapist. So their trainings are different. The psychologist, has a PhD behind their name. They spent a little bit more time in school and with their training. And so she had some different behavioral approaches, and a big one was the cognitive behavioral therapy. And that was something my previous therapist was not doing. So I would say, be open to looking into meeting with another therapist. And I was hesitant to do it at first because I thought, I don't want to have to start from square one. I don't want to start my story from the very beginning. And it was okay to do that, and you definitely will know as time goes on if the person's a good fit for you.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to listen to your gut. And if something doesn't feel right, or especially, like you said, a loved one is not seeing improvement, or attends a session with you and thinks there's something off, they might have more of an objective perspective, then that's so important to listen to. And it's okay to break up with your practitioner, you have to do what's best for you.
Right. And that's a good way of saying it, because it does, after time, become a relationship. You trust this person with everything you're telling them, and you're probably sharing with them sometimes more than you've shared with any other person in your life. At least for me, that's how it was. I was really sharing some stories and some secrets that even my own husband didn't know. And so it is like breaking up, but just like any other relationship, if, your time is not being invested wisely and their time towards you is not being productive, it's okay to look someplace else. And it's okay to talk to family or friends or, to ask, has anyone had to see a therapist before? Has anyone had an experience with, psychiatric care? And then you'd be surprised who steps forward. I know this friend that we counted on for support, we had no idea for 2 years that they were struggling with depression in their family. And I was shocked to hear it. And when I started to open up about it, they opened up about it, their personal life. And my husband actually relied on them quite a bit when I was in the hospital, phone calls and visits to say, how did you get through this as a couple? How did you survive this as a family? So I think it's hard with women and with their husbands to really understand the range of emotions that they feel. And I know my husband really felt at a loss. He did not know where to turn, did not know where to go for help. And that's also one reason with the book is I just wanted to make it a resource available to families. And I wanted to put it out there, how important it is for community support and to look within your community, a local hospital, for some sort of a support group that can help you through your mental health journey.
Yeah. And, I kind of want to conclude the interview with just like some resources or any last messages that you would want to share with a woman listening who may be struggling with grief and or postpartum depression.
Yeah, I would like to say, the message really being that you are not alone in your journey. And, patience and help from the right people, you will find the healing that you need to be whole again. And, you're not a weak person for admitting you can't do it alone. Actually, you're very strong and you're very brave for saying, I can't do this by myself. And that's the most difficult step, I think, is admitting that you need help. And that is the first step on the path, to a healthier life. And in regards to grief, there is no timeline for someone's grief experience. You revisit 7 stages of grief through your process, and sometimes you get stuck in one phase for a while. You may think you've gotten through your anger and moving on to more acceptance, and then in 6 months you're angry again. And that's okay. It can take someone as long or as little amount of time as they personally feel they need to go through their journey of grief. And I find that very important because it's very disrespectful to tell somebody that they've been sad long enough and that they need to move forward with your life. When you've suffered a loss, and a loss accompanies, it includes so many different things. It could be the loss of a job, the loss of a family member, the loss of a pet. A loss is a loss. It causes distress. It causes fear. It causes loneliness. And nobody knows but yourself how you feel about that loss. And you need to give yourself the time and the space that you need to go through that journey, and no one can take that away from you. And for me, I had to visit each stage of the grief process. I had to ask the difficult questions. I had to ask myself, when I was ready to move forward. And until you're ready to do that, those difficult, hard feelings, they're not going to just go away on their own. And I know from personal experience with other family members who never really saw a therapist or read any books about grief or gave themselves the time they needed, every time a holiday comes up, those hard feelings come up again, even 10 years later, and that's hard to deal with every time a holiday comes, to find yourself, upset and out of sorts, so to speak, because you never really gave yourself the time you needed. So, in my journey with the depression, I had a hard time finding local resources, and so I had to go kind of more on a national platform to look for that. And one big organization is the National Alliance for Mental Illness, or NAMI, and they usually have a lot of local groups or county groups that function and hold, support groups for family members or for the patient themselves. And so I found that to be a really good resource for myself. And in terms of postpartum issues, the main organization with that support is Postpartum Support International, and they have lots of resources internationally as their name says, just about how to find local help and local therapists. And there's different articles, and there's a depression scale on there if a person's not sure if they're actually suffering through postpartum depression. And they will have a local contact within your county to where you can call and find support groups in your area. And, I think it's important, for people to know a little bit about suicide prevention and to understand, that there are phone numbers and help available if you ever go down that path. I know for me that was a really scary place to be in. I needed to have a hotline to where I could call someone to, get me to the right place and to bring me back to myself and get away from that fear and to know that I would find the help that I needed.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much for coming on our show today and, sharing your story. It's so personal, and I appreciate you just being really open to going there, and how many women are going to be positively impacted because you shared your story.
Yes, thank you for having me and spreading the word about this issue. I really hope that it does have a big impact on even just one person. Then I will be happy that I opened up to share the story and share my journey.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and one more thing. How can people get in touch with you?
They can visit the publisher's website, which is estepfitzgerald.com. And there will be a link there where they can contact me.
Okay. And they can find your book on Amazon.
Yes, Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. It's available in paperback and also on the Kindle version. So, yes, I would appreciate anyone's support and, whether the book be for yourself or for a friend who may be expecting a child, or even for a husband or, another caretaker, a caregiver, because I think it's important for everyone to have a good view of that perspective of what, a person may be suffering through so that they can understand a little bit better about their personal need, in their journey.
Yes. Well, thanks again for coming on today.
Thank you very much.